The following may contain offensive language, adult humor, and or content that some viewers may find offensive. The views and opinions expressed by any one speaker does not explicitly or necessarily reflect or represent those of Mark Radulich or W2M Network. Please listen with caution, or don't listen at all.
Valley, hooey Hollywood, where any office boy or young mechanic can be a panic with just a good-looking pan. And any barmaid can be a star maid if she dances with or without a plan. Hooray for Hollywood, where you're terrific if you're even good, where anyone at all from Shirley Temple to Amy Semple is equally understood. Go out and try your luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are listening to a Radulich and Broadcasting premier podcast, Damn You Hollywood. And here's your host.
A little southern there. Damn you, Hollywood.
Damn you, Cletus. Yeah. Damn you, Hollywood. And here's your host. He's rising up back on the street. He did his time and took his chances. He went the distance. Now he's back on his feet. He's just a man with his will to survive. Don't you understand?
That will is shrinking by the minute.
So many times it happens too fast. He traded his passion for glory.
But
don't lose your grip on the dreams of the past. You must fight to keep them alive. It's the Robert Winfree of the Tiger. It's the thrill of the fight. He's rising up
that one
to the challenge of Pat Mullin. And the last known survivor stalks his prey in the night. But Robert Winfree is watching us all with the eye of the tiger.
Elmer Fudd, fronting survivor, everybody.
Pretty much.
Robert Winfree. Way!
You did not rehearse that one at all.
Not even a little bit. I was like, oh, I don't have a song, and I scrambled. And like,
that's fair.
If I've learned nothing from David Lee Roth other than how to wear spandex, it's that rehearsal is more important than the show.
You're darn right wrong. It is.
All right, Robert. This is your thing. I'm just holding the dog. Or holding the tag.
Yeah. So the wise man to my tribal chief over there is Mark Radulich. And joining us, once again, he comes on whenever he feels like it, pretty much. We have Pat Mullin joining us because it's boxing, and these two jamokes did an entire 2-hour podcast on their history of the heavyweight championship of boxing dedicated to George Foreman, and a few other podcast episodes that feature George as he has such an interesting career trajectory.
Yes.
Because you guys talked about him not only with the Ali fights, but a little bit when he fought Joe Frazier. Then you had to take a break as he took, 10, 15 years from being a relevant heavyweight before he shocked the world in one of the most miraculous things you'll ever see in sports to become a 45-year-old guy wearing the heavyweight belt.
Poor Michael Moore.
Yeah, we got to talk a little bit about that. What a sad. That guy is just sadly forgotten. But Pat's here. How you doing, Pat?
The day Pat graced your podcast was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
So before we get into our table setting, I do want to say that part of the reason why we're doing this in the afternoon on a Wednesday instead of Tuesday night was to accommodate Pat, and because I don't want to spend 4 nights in a row podcasting, but 2 days in a row, sure. People are working. There's no one to go on a date with. Absolutely, I'll spend my time during the day with my buddies. But Pat was not available in the evening, so we're doing it today on a Wednesday, which is fine. The other thing was I took my kids to go see Big George Foreman, and I made them listen to our podcast, Pat. And there were Jonas, being the more intellectual of the two, had a lot of questions.
How did we arrive? Boy, 3 years ago, you would not have bet on that switch.
No, my son's a fucking. I have the test results. My son's a genius. You can make
Maybe
fun of what you
headbutting the
want.
walls did knock something loose in the good way.
It fixed whatever was broken to begin with. Anyway, but he had a lot of questions about Foreman.
I'm led to believe that more head trauma is usually the answer, right?
That's what
Absolutely.
the Simpsons have taught us.
A couple of years ago, when Lily was doing reading for school, they read these like biographies, and she would get tested on them. And I made her read the one on Muhammad Ali, and she got it. She understood what he was about. She understood that he was an entertainer and not just an athlete. But and then I showed her the Rumble in the Jungle, and she was like, okay, I get it. And I showed her what rope-a-dope was, and she was like, all right. And then she went off to go do Lily stuff. This is now a couple of years later, and she's watching the movie. And I was like, okay, Lily, now you've read the books about Muhammad Ali. You've listened to my podcast. You watched The Rumble in the Jungle. What'd you think of Big George Foreman? And she goes, was Muhammad Ali really that much of a douchebag? How did he not get shot? And I'm just like, well, it wasn't for lack of trying because Joe Frazier wanted to.
Dumb luck.
But I thought like that was a great from the movie about Big George Foreman. Her big takeaway was, wow, Muhammad Ali sucks. He's awful. And I thought that was a fun takeaway. Having said that, we're all between the ages of 35 and I'm almost 47. We've seen a lot of boxing movies, both fictional and biographical in nature. You had the Will Smith Ali movie. There's been quite a few others. I think there was Cinderella Man was one. I'll go to you first, Pat. When thinking about boxing movies, both fictional and biographical, what are some of your favorites?
Biographical, since we're on the topic, Cinderella Man is definitely high up there. A lot of it due to Russell Crowe's work to really portray a realistic version of Jim Braddock, which I thought was terrific.
He lost so much weight for that role because Braddock was not a big guy.
Yeah, and looked like a fighter from the time period.
Yeah.
Like if you'd have watched him in black and white newsreel footage, he would have looked the part. Which I'll talk about with Carlos Takam as Joe Frazier later. That's a great one. Raging Bull, for all my dislike for De Niro, it's a great depiction of LaMotta's life in a very honest, earnest way. And I love the way it's shot in black and white. Fictional, obviously the Rocky series is something we all love to varied extents, but we love it. And my favorite fictional that never gets any play because it's not released on DVD or digital anywhere, but you can find it on a little video streaming site, is called Streets of Gold, because I love the depiction of how boxers are trained. It's set in Brooklyn in the 80s, so it's very near and dear to my heart. But I also think it's a really great portrayal of that and the Cold War schematics between the U.S. and Soviet boxing programs at the time, which was a very big deal for a long time.
And the more, there's nothing more true to life than the more talented black boxer getting his hand broken right before the Olympics, right?
What is the name of the movie, Pat, with the one boxer who had like the 1,000,000 to 1 chance that Rocky is somewhat based on, and he ends up like with a terrible coke habit? When you and I were talking about this, I watched it. You made me watch it when we were doing the History of Boxing series.
There's two released on Chuck Wepner right around the same time. I think the one you're talking about is the one with Liev Schreiber as Chuck Wepner, right?
Yes. Okay. The Chuck Wepner movies, I think, are fantastic. I'm also, and I talked about this with Jason when we reviewed the last Creed movie. Huge Rocky fan. It almost goes without saying. It's funny. I saw something on Twitter recently about somebody put on Twitter like the boxing and Rocky movies are trash, and like just a series of responses underneath going, wow, is that not what those movies are about? Like, granted, by the time you get to Rocky Balboa, it's better. The fight choreography in Rocky Balboa far exceeds anything in the previous movies, but
it helped. Well, it helps that largely with Rocky Balboa, what they did was they basically set up for a professional broadcast. Then
you used an actual high-level professional fighter.
Yeah, then the professional boxer and Sylvester Stallone got in there and basically just sparred for 2 rounds, and they kind of just cut that together.
Yeah,
right. But the art of choreographing a boxing match where, and I've talked about this with my kids because they've asked, I made them watch a bunch of the Rocky movies and they always have questions. And they saw the Creed movies, same thing. It was like, you have to find that happy medium of, you have to make this look somewhat realistic, but you also have to make it entertaining. And if you've ever watched technical boxing with somebody who's not a fan of boxing, that person wants to kill themselves by the end of the fight. I not that long ago.
All the people complaining about Mayweather Pacquiao spring.
Damn it, you took the words right out of my mouth. You know, I told that story where we covered those fights, and I just cut those shows together and posted them on W2M. But I remember watching the Mayweather Pacquiao fight. Half the room is boxing people, and the other half is their girlfriends, and and a handful of hanger-ons. And they were, and the people that weren't boxing fans were like, "This is the most boring thing ever. Why are we watching this?" And all the boxing fans are like, "Shut up, whore." But that's the reaction you get, is if people don't know what they're looking at, it looks boring. I know my wife, who's watched a lot of fights with me through mixed martial arts, pro wrestling, and boxing, likes boxing the least, because unless she's seeing an action fight or a knockout, she doesn't know what she's looking at, so it's boring. That said, as far as like my favorite boxing movies and ones I like to watch,
go ahead and talk about The Great White Hype. We all know it's coming.
Fine. I love The Great White Hype, but that's not so much about boxing as
most realistic depiction of boxing promotion in the world.
But that's why I love it so much. Like that is not a boxing movie so much as it is about mocking boxing promotion. And you know me, I love a good business movie. It's such a great parody of the boxing world. Samuel L. Jackson mocking Tom Kane.
It's a lot less parody than you think.
Yeah. There's that. I like the Ali Will Smith movie. I know.
No, that's wrong.
I know it's not the world's greatest depiction of Muhammad Ali, but I enjoy the movie.
Or anybody else.
Fantastic.
No, that's about the most charitable depiction of Howard Cosell you'll find anywhere.
Fair.
And bless John Voight for doing all that through so much makeup that he actually looked like Howard Cosell. He is utterly unrecognizable.
Cinderella Man is like the high water mark for boxing movies. I think that one's up there. And just so we can move on and let Robert have a little bit of time here before we move into the movie itself, I just for the nostalgia of it, just for the shits and giggles, I love that one movie where De Niro and Stallone are two old boxers, and
Grudge Match.
Oh, Grudge Match is fantastic. Just the bits there with Chael Sonnen. Like, I don't know. I saw you kick him like a girl. Like, oh, it's so good. How about you, Robert? What are some of your non-fiction and fictional boxing movies?
I think technically speaking, Cinderella Man, we've all mentioned, is kind of it's the best made.
Yeah.
You have a very talented cast, top to bottom. You have a great director. It helps that Cinderella Man also gets to draw on what is not. The quote is actually at the beginning of the movie, and it's not exaggerated. The story of Jimmy Braddock is the most compelling human interest drama probably in the history of boxing, certainly in the history of heavyweight boxing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some compelling characters that come out of the heavyweight title scene. You guys touched on a lot of them. I'm going to just throw this out there. If you haven't listened to Mark and Pat's history of the heavyweight title, it's a series on YouTube. Go look it up. You will be better for it if you're even remotely interested. But Braddock fighting through the Depression, everything he had to, temporarily retiring, being a very undersized heavyweight, walking back into the welfare office and giving back all cash for all the money that he'd received because there's other people still struggling more than he is. My biggest gripe with that movie is that they seriously did Max Baer very, very dirty, and he didn't deserve that.
Yeah, not a real life villain, not someone who enjoyed killing people. That was not Max.
Another guy who gets done dirty frequently by boxing history is in roughly kind of near the same time period, but you get Max Schnelling, who is frequently depicted as a Nazi sympathizer when in fact he was the opposite. He got a lot of people out of Germany, a lot of Jews out. Again, a guy who just kind of got because of how he was portrayed in the build-up to his fight with Joe Louis, the fiction became the narrative. And that did that poor guy very, very dirty. Fictional, there's a lot of ways you can go with this, and I'm going to echo a lot of what you guys mentioned. I don't hate the Ali movie. It's not my favorite. But Will Smith does a great acting job in that movie of something that you have to do when you have to play a big character. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit when it pertains to this movie. He nails the affect of Ali despite never actually looking like him.
Mm-hmm.
If you want another example of that, Frank Langella's portrayal of Richard Nixon and Frost Nixon. He doesn't bear a lot of physical facial resemblance to Nixon. Nixon being, of course, a very prominent figure. We all know what Richard Nixon looked like. But everything about his portrayal is, yeah, that's Nixon. From the way he speaks to the way he carries himself, that's all there. And Will Smith does a really good job with that in the Ali movie.
One I forgot to mention going along with Ali is Denzel Washington's The Hurricane. That's up there. Oh, really? That's like one of my favorite movies of all time. That's like in my top 20.
It's so poorly depicted, so many things, that it was actually the loser of a lawsuit from Joey Giardello.
Oh, really?
Where it's depicted in the fight that the only reason Hurricane Carter lost his middleweight title bid against Giardello was due to racist politics, when in fact Giardello gave him a boxing lesson for 12 out of 15 rounds, won that very clearly. Giardello sued the makers of the movie and won a large settlement because of it.
So from my vantage point, not knowing anything about Reuben Carter, to me, it's a finely made movie. When you're looking at it, you're like, hey, wait a minute, none of this is accurate.
This is wildly inaccurate. Yes.
There's accuracy you can play with, and then there's accuracy you really ought to leave alone.
Okay.
And Hurricane goes a bit too far. Let me give you two that I know Pat's gonna pop for, as far as other boxing movies I kind of enjoy. If you enjoy a little bit of silliness with a really solid cast, because there's almost no better cinematic villain than Bruce Dern. Diggstown is a really fun watch.
That is a great movie.
Diggstown is so much fun.
Again, man, look, Bruce Dern, he knew what he was doing when he took a role that shot John Wayne in the back. And he's been a villain ever since. I don't think I've ever seen him in a sympathetic role. And
Pat, what's the one, I think it's with Forest Whitaker, that you made me watch about Jack Johnson? Or it was like aping Jack Johnson's life?
That was not with Forest Whitaker. That was with James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones, yeah. That's a pretty good one. What's the name of that one?
That one is, why can't I remember it? The Great White Hope.
Okay.
Which is very much a Jack Johnson biography with, the names changed and whatever. But it's basically the Jack Johnson story for a large part of it. He plays, I think his name in the movie is Big Jim Jefferson instead of Jack Johnson.
Right.
He was terrific in it.
We watched that for the podcast, and I ended up really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Last one I want to throw out then would be about illegal boxing. And you have to double check which movie you're getting, but there's a movie called Gladiator.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you said that one, because I was going to throw that in there. Dude, I love Gladiator, if nothing for Brian Dennehy.
Brian Dennehy's awesome.
Dude, Brian Dennehy tilting his head and going, forehead's the toughest part of the body, as the guy like breaks his hand on his forehead. Oh, I love Gladiator's a silly ass movie, but I love it to pieces.
I love Gladiator.
The only thing it needed was a better lead, because that poor guy is outshone by Cuba, by Robert Loggia, by Brian Dennehy, by pretty much everyone, by the love interest. Like everyone else on screen winds up taking that guy's shine.
Also, Cuba, terrific boxing in a movie.
Yeah, he really seemed to dedicate himself to making that look pretty darn real.
Yeah.
Because I feel like people listening to this going, are they going to talk about this? They're going to talk about that. You have to talk about $1 Million Baby.
No, you don't.
That is depressing. Fuck that movie. But it's well made.
I love that movie, and I know it's an unpopular opinion. I love that movie not for the boxing. Like the boxing is kind of secondary. You could tell that story about pretty much anything.
Yeah, it's not really a boxing movie so much as boxing's in the movie.
Is it though?
Allegedly.
I'm going to break my neck with a stool.
My favorite parts of that movie, honestly, my favorite thing about that movie is Morgan Freeman reminding everyone that heart doesn't win you anything.
Yeah.
And then, because he's got that great line, and it's true, like every fighter has a number, and you don't know when it is, but when that ticket's punched, you're done. And then he gets one more against that douchebag at the very end, who's
the one-eyed 75-year-old man beating the shit out of this, yoked up, young prime fighter. Like, okay, we're stretching a little far, Clint.
More than a little. I would have so much preferred if he snuck in an elbow or something, and that's why he beat him.
I gotta get Pat's reaction to this, and I'll actually make sure I'm looking at the camera. I wanted to see what his face looks like when I say The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg.
Love it. Very good movie.
Woo! It's a great movie.
Yeah, that one's up there.
I think again, the only thing you can knock is Mark physically, in terms of body, looks way too like good and ripped for how Mickey looked. And I'm not saying that shit on Mickey. Mickey's physique, much more fighter-based. Mark's physique, much more bodybuilder shredding-based.
Yeah, Wahlberg, he's got a good chemist.
All right. With that said, we now have another biopic here on the life of George Foreman, from his youth to when he won the heavyweight championship. So, Robert, take it away with as much of a plot synopsis as this thing could possibly have.
Well, again, this is about the life of George Foreman. So it opens with him as a young man, somewhat disenfranchised in the boroughs of Houston. And he's a kid, his family's poor, he's a little maladjusted, getting into fights, never quite graduates high school, becomes a bit of a street tough, trying to roll people coming out of the bars, and he tries to roll a cop. Doesn't go so well. He winds up hiding under a house covered in human excrement to avoid the scent from the dogs, which is only partially how that works. Like, I understand the filmmaking going on there.
It's a metaphor more than...
Yeah.
I understand the filmmaking, but like, if you're already in it, you really don't have to smear it on your face. So he decides, I have now run from the cops, being chased by dogs, hiding in someone else's feces. This ain't going my way. So he joins the Job Corps, which, for those of you who don't know, was a government program around this period of time to try and get people who struggled in the... let me put it this way. I'm legitimately shocked that our current government has not tried to bring this back. Just saying.
You're going to get us so far off topic. So.
I am, but if you want to know what it because it's not a thing anymore. Like, this is what it was. It was a attempt to recapitulate elements of the New Deal for the 1960s, when people were struggling with school and struggling to find work, and
population boom of people who were largely
When I was a kid, there was something called BOCES. This still exists to some degree, where you can basically, if you're not an academic, if you don't plan on going to college, you can kind of get out of school, learn a trade, and and get a career and take care of yourself. That's what Job Corps was then. This still exists to some degree in different places in some form or fashion today.
So George Foreman goes to the Job Corps, which is located in California, meets a guy who he should not have trusted. You can't trust you can't trust anyone playing your records that loud. You just can't.
Who is, of course, a pastiche of multiple characters throughout his life.
Yeah, because there's always, which is like the least of the sins of this movie. Like, you've got to. There's always conglomeration of characters that has to happen, otherwise, because we don't need 50 characters.
I don't want to keep interrupting your plot synopsis, but now there's at least two things I have to double back to. One of them, like that character, my kids had so my kids are always so funny about what they'll tear out of a movie, and I'm like, what did you think of George Foreman? What an inspirational story! Like, can we talk about his friend for a moment? And like an hour later, my kids are still going like, and another thing about that guy, and I'm like, really? Yeah, the fuck?
He's on screen for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was like that comment in Renfield. You get the villain's Postmates. Like, you're like not focusing on the right character. Go ahead, Robert.
So while there, he gets into a couple of fights, and he draws the attention of Forest Whitaker, who takes this large, athletically gifted young man and says, "You know how to box?" And he puts him in a boxing ring, and he gets schooled, because this is what always happens the first time you get into a boxing ring if you don't actually know how to box. Someone who's been going at it for 6 months will make you look stupid. And frustrated, George Foreman punches a heavy bag clean off the chain that it is attached to. And Forest Whitaker goes over and says, "Son, you got hurting power. And it's okay that you got made to look stupid. He didn't know any more than you did when he came in 6 months ago, and that happened to him."
Yes,
and
the
George
thing
Foreman
that George really learned from that lesson was perseverance, which he did not.
And George goes, "But I've been disrespected." And he goes, "So what? You do not live in an otter culture, son. Have dignity." And George Foreman goes, "Fine, I'll stick this out." And he begins to train to box. And he says he sees an article about Smoking Joe Frazier, going, "You know what? Being the heavyweight champion of the world, pretty darn good for your bank account." And he goes, "I want this." And his trainer goes, "But you don't understand. We have a system. You have to go through the amateurs first. This is how things are done." And he goes, "But there's all these Thai kids who are 8 years old with 100 fights under their belt, and all the Mexicans who turned pro at 15. And he goes, "Shut up! We're not talking about that. We're talking about the American system of boxing."
Right.
Also, ask how many of those kids have any money.
Because we're not trying to play into the system of betting that goes on. If you're not familiar with child TIE fighters, it's a thing.
Yeah. Come on.
And he says, "So we're going to wait 5 years and then you'll be at the Olympics." And he goes, "But there's an Olympics next year." And Forest Whitaker tells him, "But if you train even as hard as any man has ever trained in the history of the world, you won't make the Olympics in a year." And then he wins the gold medal.
In that Olympics.
Because when you can hit like a truck, you can make up a lot of technical ground. So he wins the gold medal and then gets crapped on because this was the same Olympics where you had the Black Power salute.
John Carlos and Tommy Smith. Yeah.
And George Foreman was like, "Yeah, but I don't care. I won."
I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free.
His ring walk music for forever.
Nice.
This is the story of young George Foreman. "But I won, and I'm good. The hell is wrong with you people?"
Yeah. I wish when we get to the money, I'll readdress this, but I wish this movie had done better, because in a world right now where there's so much like
division.
We've got some issues going on. I don't want to get into the politics of what's happening in this country, but there's a lot. But there's a lot of like concerted
Democratic Party refusing to allow Joe Biden to waddle his way onto a stage to debate
the concerted opinion that we are Roman decline, and that we are lurching towards fascism and things like that. It's nice to see a story that remembers we're still a free country, that we're still a land of opportunity, and that if you've got talent and drive, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps out of the muck and mire. It's a very It's a very conservative philosophy, which drives half of this country screaming into the sea, but it's still the lifeblood of this country. Go ahead, Pat.
To piggyback on that, George himself has always talked about how there's nowhere else in the world he could have got a Job Corps opportunity. Said Job Corps found what he found. And so regardless of any kind of political motivations or anything like that, because he did that, because he represented a country that he felt gave him something when he didn't have anything, he was always very proud to represent the United States. He's always said the proudest moment of him was winning a gold medal for the United States. And that's why he was proud to wave the flag. He wasn't going to go along with the Black Power salute because he didn't believe in division. He thought we should see this. He had the perspective, and I'm not saying he's right or wrong, or John Carlos and Tommy Smith were right or wrong,
right?
But his perspective was one of, I wouldn't have this without this being behind me, and that's how I see it, and that's why I'm proud to represent it.
And don't get me wrong. Look, for the people listening to this going, "But this country sucks and I hate it, and here's why." Fine. I'm not. Then don't watch the movie. Don't listen to this podcast. Go do the things that make you happy. Go live in the places that you want to live in if you think they're better. I'm not here making that argument for them. I'm saying for those who kind of cling to philosophical conservatism and still believe that this is the best country in the world, boy, is this the movie for you. This speaks to that. That's, it's one of the things I like about it. One of the things my kids liked about it, and they're typical kids. They tend to, lean left because that's how kids are. And even they were like, "Wow, what a great and inspirational movie." By the way, Muhammad Ali's a douchebag. Go on, Robert.
So George Foreman turns pro, begins training with, in no small part, the old mongoose Archie Moore. And that was his nickname. And bless him, brief Archie Moore story for a little bit of boxing history for those of you who don't know. This was the guy who was originally supposed to train Muhammad Ali. They did train together for a bit when he was Cassius Clay, because young Archie Moore looks an awful lot like Cassius Clay. I referenced that for a specific period in Ali's life, not to try and monkey with his name. And Moore tried to teach him about boxing. And their personalities were so similar, they just bounced off each other. There was too much friction.
All right.
So
for brevity and time's sake, we got to move this on.
Yeah. So Archie Moore is one of his trainers, and Big George starts tearing his way through the heavyweight division. I believe you again, when you guys talked about him, you said, that young, angry, big, strong, afroed up George Foreman is a force of nature.
Yeah, I believe my exact quote was, "I'll fight almost anybody except for angry George Foreman in that era." Even that one, I'm just like, whatever you want, man.
I think your better quote was, "He was sent from the depths of hell by Sonny Liston."
You are not kidding. So yeah, he runs through. Maybe they reference his power a few times in the movie, and it's sadly not. George Foreman, just so everyone understands this, he is maybe the hardest puncher in heavyweight boxing history. He's one of the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like him, Ernie Shavers,
Tyson.
No, he's not in that discussion.
No, Tyson's not there.
He's not a raw power one punch guy, Mark. I'm sorry. He's not that level of force the way Ernie and George were.
Okay, I'm hearing you.
Who's one of the other guys who fought both of them?
Ron Lyle.
Lyle, that was it. Because there's a kind of a famous bit of interaction with George. Someone recorded it where they were talking about, like, heaviest punchers in boxing history, and you're up there, and they mentioned a few other guys, and George agrees with them. George does not say Ernie Shavers, and somebody asks him, like, everyone else mentions Ernie Shavers, and he says, because I was lucky enough not to fight him, so I don't know for a fact how hard he hit.
Okay.
But utilizing this power, George kind of steamrolls everything, gets his title shot, and is largely kind of counted out by the narratives. He was counted out.
Mm-hmm.
Because
he was a 3-1 underdog in real life.
Yeah. And the issue with that, my only issue with that is, first of all, 3-1 in boxing is actually relatively close. If you're not familiar with how boxing odds work, if you are used to, especially like MMA odds, you rarely get 3-1 in MMA. Plus or minus like 250 is usually the average, and better fights are a lot closer. He was an underdog, but even at the time, the people who were in the know about George and who could kind of like see what he did versus what Joe Frazier did, you kind of went like, you're gonna give me 3-1? That's valuable, because George's style, and this plays out in the movie, he tears through the heavyweight Joe Frazier. He tears through him like butter. There's a degree of, this is a bit of a filmcraft thing, but there's a degree of accuracy in the recreation of some of the fight sequences in this movie that is truly commendable. They get that second knockdown where Frazier kind of walks in midair for a second, like he takes a real couple of short steps. They recreate that perfectly. And now Foreman is the man, and still, and the movie talks to this, his personal life is not doing well. His marriage is on the outs. He's got all the money, but he's trusting people he shouldn't trust, which is a sadly common refrain in the world of boxing. Before George and after George, this is still a thing. And then, with all this baggage, again, a marriage falling apart, a lack of respect, being forced to travel to Zaire, which no longer exists, and fight this not only skilled fighter, but this polar opposite to him personality-wise, this unbelievable trash-talking, loudmouth, brash guy he doesn't want to fight in a place he doesn't want to fight him, under rules, under circumstances he doesn't really like, has the fight pushed back by, 3 weeks due to an injury?
Almost a month, because he got a cut in sparring.
And is talked into staying. He's having to deal with Don King, who never features in this movie, which is kind of a shame.
Nice.
Well, it's nice because screw Don King. It's kind of a shame because their brief interactions were very George dealt with Don King once, and it was like, no.
We are at the 30-minute mark.
But famously, this is the Rumble in the Jungle. He loses to Muhammad Ali. And this breaks part of his spirit. He's not happy about this. He's not happy about any of it. He's
believed that God is talking to him in this moment. At which point
no, that's not
later.
yet. Not
that's
yet.
Later.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, and I loved seeing this recreated because you guys talked about it and it was hilarious when you talked about it. He decides, I'm going to go knock out 5 bums in one night.
That.
Gets into a shouting match with Ali at ringside.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit later, loses a unanimous decision. Where were they for this fight? Because I had in my head it was
San Juan, Puerto Rico.
I had in my head it was Puerto Rico, and I was so he goes to Puerto Rico, in the wrong time of year.
2 days ahead of getting to the fight. He's there 2 days before the fight.
Yeah, just poor preparation. Gets there, it's hotter than hell. He fights, he loses, he looks like crap. He gets to the back, he passes out. Has a spiritual experience, believes that he sees a vision from God. And I, as a religious guy, let me just say thank you to this movie for treating that seriously, because that could have been a joke.
Yeah.
Not a joke. Whether you believe what he saw was real or not, he believes it, and they treated it with sincerity. Comes out of that and says, God spoke to me, I'm done. He retires, becomes a preacher, remarries, gets his life in order. Again, is still kind of, because he was a very successful boxer, he has some money that he believes is being properly invested. So if you believe your money is safe, then you don't mind taking a few riskier things, like you buy property that maybe you shouldn't if you know your real financial situation. So he opens a youth center in Houston to try and make the community better. He's doing all these admirable things, and he's ballooned up to north of 300 pounds because what does he care? But he's still got some name recognition. So he's doing some commercial gigs, and you guys phrase it like this, like he kind of becomes America's happy uncle.
Yeah.
And then it all falls apart. He finds out, no, your money was not where you thought it was. You've been screwed. You've been robbed. Like so many boxers before you and so many after you. And he starts selling off stuff. He tries to keep his center open. He tries to figure out what to do. And he arrives at the conclusion that I can preach and I can fight. And I can't pay the bills preaching. So he goes to his old trainer and says, I want to fight. I need money. I don't need to be champion of the world, because his trainer reminds him, maybe the best ever. Joe Louis did try to come back, and Rocky Marciano darn near killed him.
Yeah. So he says, we're going to start at the bottom. And
give me bums.
Yeah.
Give me bums. I just need the checks to clear. That's all I need right now. So he starts on the comeback trail, and he wins. He beats some bums, he gets some money, and he starts building himself up, and he eventually earns a shot at Evander Holyfield. And they made an interesting film choice here to just use archival footage of the fight between Foreman and Holyfield, which, if you haven't seen that fight, by the way, look it up.
It's a
really good fight. And he loses this shot. He comes up short in a unanimous decision to the younger Holyfield, but he acquits himself very well. Better than almost anyone expected. Now, whether that's him being better or Holyfield maybe not quite being what everyone thought he was at the time, little of both. And I have a lot of respect for Evander, but when you look at that fight on paper, shouldn't have gone the way that it did. But it did. And he gets a giant check from HBO to the tune of about $10 million from their sales of that, because people wanted to see that fight.
Right. And by this point, I think he's starting to do the grill.
Well, he's already done the first bit of the grill, but now this is one of those things that, like, you do it and then you gain notoriety. So something you did previously starts gaining more steam.
Right.
A little bit going viral before viral was the thing. And he could probably retire here, but he thinks about it and he talks with his wife and says, no, I'm supposed to be champion again. So he perseveres. In fact, I believe he loses. They don't show this, but I believe he loses another title fight before he gets the Moorer fight.
Not an official title fight, but he loses to Tommy Morrison for the then unrecognized WBO title.
Right. But he gets a shot at Michael Moorer, who is, again, a kind of sadly overlooked figure in the history of heavyweight boxing, a very talented fighter who just gets overshadowed by just being sandwiched between kind of the Tyson Holyfield era and then the human interest story of George Foreman, and what happened to Moorer, after. Not exactly.
As Pat Rowe would remind us about the history of boxing, a very prevalent issue going on at this time of heavyweight boxing is the crack epidemic.
Yeah. And that's what kind of hit Moorer, for those of you who don't know. But this movie cuts out one of my favorite bits. I have two favorite bits of boxing. This is craft, so just give me a second here. My two favorite bits of boxing trash talk at a press conference. One of them references the fighter that Pat's wearing on his shirt, because there's nothing funnier than Marvin Hagler stuffing tissue paper in his ears And then when the other guy's trash talking him, just going, I can't hear you, and then proceeding to beat the ever-loving crap out of him because Marvin Hagler was the best. But Michael Moore's trainer was Teddy Atlas. And at the press conference for their fight, Atlas is beside himself, trying to bully George Foreman, partially because he thinks he can bully him, and partially because I don't want my guy fighting an over-the-hill circus act. You should still be retired. You're a 45-year-old guy. You're out of shape. You shouldn't be here. And George Foreman eventually just tells him, shut up. Why don't you shut up and go get me a sandwich? And it's the best. It's the best thing.
Doesn't even look up at him. Just shut up and go get me a sandwich.
Yep. But despite taking a beating for 8 rounds, Foreman perseveres, and he always said, like, yeah, I'm going to lose early, but I got something for more late. And late in the fight, he's able to connect with a really short 1-2 that just shakes Moore to his ancestors. He drops. It doesn't even look like much of a punch. If you guys ever doubt the power of George Foreman, look this fight up. That punch looks like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But Moore is flatlined, down, not even close to getting up. And a 45-year-old looking a little bit out of shape, 20 years between heavyweight title reigns, still to this day the oldest heavyweight champion in boxing history. I believe still to this day the longest gap between reigns as heavyweight champion. Neither of those are ever going to be touched, by the way.
Yeah.
And the movie ends with, again, some highlights, some side-by-sides of real footage and what they did in the movie. You know, how George and Muhammad, there's a great bit in this where George Foreman goes to Muhammad Ali's house and says, I need to ask you forgiveness for how much I hated you. And Ali says, look, I can't knock out Ken Norton, but I think you can. It's really nice.
Done it. Let's just do it again, George.
And it's really nice to see Ken Norton, another forgotten figure, get a little bit of shine because he had Ali's number more than anybody.
And I'll guarantee you that was a lot of input from George, just because he's one of those guys that, George is a guy who looks out for his own kind of thing. And he's always tried to praise the other guys of his
He's
hero.
a producer in the movie. I mean, one of the reasons why the movie comes off as well as it does is because he had a big say in how it went.
Because he's refused this for years, by the way, just so everybody knows. He's refused to have a movie made basically since he won the title again in 94.
Well, I'm sure he doesn't want to be made to look like a circus act, like very protective of his image. That image is it's essentially what got him through that time. Yeah. Robert, anything else to the plot synopsis? Because if not, I really want to get into the craft.
Last thing, because will just always make me laugh. One of the final title cards being, he had 6 kids with his second wife.
Mm-hmm.
They're all named George, including his daughter, who's Georgette.
And my kids thought that was the best. I want to ask Pat, I'm going to get your full craft. You've been waiting patiently for us to get through this part, almost 40 minutes now. But I want to say something, and I want to begin the craft there. This movie's not critically not reviewed well. I think some of that is its religious tone, some of it's conservative tone, and we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
Not only am I saving it for that, I'm saving some of that for tomorrow when we talk about Peter Pan and Wendy.
I'm sure a lot of the critical review is, just about bias against this kind of a movie, which we'll get to it in a few minutes. But you can tell George's hands are all over this movie because it does paint him in a very nice light. He has a nice arc to him. He starts out as this very dark, angry, bullied figure. He finds a venue for this anger, and then he comes to Jesus. And very much wrestles with, I don't want to be that person anymore. I need to be able to pay bills, and I want to be able to do what I'm good at without becoming a bad person again. And that's great. That's a great part of this movie. Here's my one issue with it, though, and this is what I wanted to get your take on. Even my kids kind of mentioned this, and I agreed with them. Not enough time spent with Sonny Liston. I mean, if we're gonna sit here and say Sonny Liston was this ne'er-do-well criminal boxer character, as we talked about in our podcast, and he was an influence on George, I needed to see more of. I wish we had spent a little less time with George and his wife and family, and a little bit more time with George in that period. What do you think, Pat?
So when I'm in the theater and I see that, they have the moment of, oh shit, that's Sonny Liston. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, this is where we're going to see how Sonny molds George into the better version of what he was.
Right.
In terms of being an intimidator and a monster. And he's going to take all this this anger and rage from, I just won a gold medal for this country and I'm being called to sell out and all this stuff. You know what? Good. They don't care about you. You're going to hurt every single person along the way and you're going to clean up on them. And I feel like they missed such an opportunity to have even just like a 5-minute window montage of like Sonny kind of showing him how to get mean, how to get angry, how to take what he wants and screw everybody else type of thing. Right. Where George is not maybe seen as sympathetically as he is, but I still think there's the sympathy because he still did everything he could, got shit on for it, and now he's out to claim it back by force.
Compared to Spike Lee's Malcolm X, how much time we're spending with Malcolm X as a ne'er-do-well, and how you need all of that as a contrast to his time in prison, and then when he's Malcolm X proper.
Right.
We needed that kind of same transition with George.
And I get that this is a tough story to tell as a whole in the allotted time for when the movie's runtime, I believe, is 2 hours and 13 minutes, which is a long movie. It doesn't feel that long to me, at least it didn't. But also at the same time, there's some parts of it that needed more time. And even just a 5-minute run with him and Sonny. And even Sonny, you know, we know because we follow the history, Sonny dies under very mysterious circumstances in 1970. You could have shown how that affected George prior to winning the heavyweight championship. Like,
there's actually a great line about Sonny Liston. Nobody knows exactly when he was born, and nobody knows exactly when he died.
I think we talked about that on the show. I think the movie does a disservice to Sonny by not talking about him enough.
Yeah.
Either don't address it. If you're gonna be, this is one of my criticisms of the movie. If you're gonna bring it up, you have to talk about it. If you're not gonna talk about it, or if you're only gonna be like, that's Sonny Liston. Again, not to harp on this, but there's a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old in the audience who don't know the fuck what a Sonny Liston is.
Yeah. Or why he's important in any context.
Right. And so it's your job now as the filmmaker to tell those kids why he's important, or don't put him in the movie.
I feel like there's stuff on the cutting room floor involving Sonny that we didn't get. That hopefully when they release this, you know, we'll get those bits and pieces that we didn't get to see in the movie. But I feel like there's definitely some stuff on the cutting room floor with Sonny that was left out. And it's a shame we didn't get that in the movie because I think it would have helped it flow so much better.
Probably as they're watching dailies, they're kind of looking at each other and go, you know, the director and the editor, and they're like, this is George's story. We don't need this. And, you know, they don't know the 3 neckbeards on a podcast. They're like, no. We needed the Sonny Liston stuff. You know, especially if the whole movie used to just give George Foreman this great big shine.
But again, like looking at it from a craft perspective, I think it frames the character of George better if you have that mentor.
I agree. It's why I brought it up.
Yeah, especially with him coming out of the Olympics. And, you know, there's people who are proud of him, his immediate family, but there's everybody acting like, how could you wave that flag?
Right.
And, okay, you're not happy with me? Now I'm being mentored by the most intimidating fighter up to this point in history.
And that's brilliant because, again, you needed that contrast to show why the other stuff. It's like they pulled away from the flag stuff, and then they touched on it, but then they're moving into the next thing, and it's like, no, you missed something.
And he's just winning fights, and he's winning them by knockout, but they're not showing that this guy is scowling, this guy is angry, this guy is a villain.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Pat, because we talked about on the show. I mean, I made a point of saying that he's menacing looking, and I kind of was looking at my kids going, you're not seeing the George Foreman I talked about on that show. You're seeing a very sanitized version. And again, it's his movie. He, by all rights, if he wants to show the public, if the story he wants to tell is, hey, you can't go through life an angry person, and that's fine.
It's a good message, but you got to show your anger.
I think
his anger in this is kind of downplayed.
Yeah, I would put more of that on George Tillman, who directed it, than I would George himself. Foreman, that is. I think Tillman maybe thought if he painted him in a villainous way that it would have ruined the second chapter of his career, where he is the nice guy who's showing you.
Again, did anyone not show him Malcolm X?
Right, and that's the part. You had to take that chance to portray him as villainous, so the redemption part of it is even more hitting.
Yeah, right.
And I think Tillman was afraid to take that risk, and as a result, the second part of it lacks that same impact.
Yeah, agreed. All right, what else, Pat, in terms of craft?
So I touched on this briefly, but you know, Carlos Takam as Joe Frazier looks completely wrong. He looks nothing like Joe Frazier, and I give them a lot of credit for how well they crafted the set, the scenery, the wardrobe, everything. But he looks wildly out of place as this huge muscular tank with traps like Goldberg. You did not look like Joe Frazier. No. I'm really sorry.
There's also some framing and blocking in that scene, because if you've seen the fight, and we all have, dude, Foreman he looks like a giant, and Frazier looks like David. Well, that fight looks like David versus Goliath when you see them in the ring. The guy they got here and Khris Davis, who plays Foreman, are way too close in height. Like they don't do service to that fight in that way in this movie.
Yeah. They really frame Doc Brodus as this big figure throughout George's entire life and career.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing they do kind of with Ray Arcel in the biopic Hands of Stone about Roberto Duran.
Mm-hmm.
What they neglect to tell you is after a certain point in time, those guys are not there anymore.
Right.
Doc Brodus pretty much stays with the Job Corps. He does not go on with George into a pro career or anything. But again, they're using now him as the main mentor figure through George's life to almost act as a narrator for George's career and such. And
right.
When in reality, that wasn't him. George had Archie Moore and Dick Sadler, who he introduces them to. And after the Ali fight, he's got Gil Clancy and then nobody until he comes back. And he's got Charlie Shipes and Angelo Dundee, who was in Ali's corner, of course, when they fought, and is now working for George during George's comeback.
Right.
What a missed opportunity that was for this movie. Because we see briefly Angelo Dundee during the Rumble in the Jungle. He's constantly yelling at Ali to get off the ropes.
And whoever the guy is that played Angelo, I don't know who it was, but he nails Angelo because he's saying things like, go on and get that sucker. And that's exactly how Angelo talked. So well done to him. I feel like, again, they're taking very dramatic narrative with Doc. And for those who don't know, Doc basically stayed training amateurs, worked through the Job Corps, was part of the Olympic process. But he died pretty much broke in Vegas in the 70s, or not in the 70s, but he was largely active in the 70s through then. But he died later on, I believe, sometime, I want to say it was in the late 90s, but he was kind of broke when he died, unfortunately, because he would train amateurs but not go on with pros, and that's just what happens. They largely did the same thing with manipulating the relationship between Arcel and Duran and Hands of Stone. It's just one of those things that follows in boxing movies where for some reason they think they have to have that same character throughout the course of the other character's life.
I'm going to tell you without getting into, because I do want to keep on time for this. I have a hard out at 2:00, but narrative, you want to keep your movie slim. You want to keep it tight. If you start introducing new characters throughout, you're all over the place.
Right.
I look, and that is why, and I got to get to this when you're done, but that is why the one guy that, his friend who rips him off is a pastiche of all these other people, because you can't, this isn't Lord of the Rings. You can't introduce 106 characters.
No.
Throughout.
And we're not saying that doesn't mean the craft is bad. Like, look at Goodfellas. Goodfellas has a ton of pastiche characters molded into one. It's one of the most, beloved movies of all time.
Right.
Which again is based largely on a true life of somebody's, upbringing and such,
right?
Just like this is. But again, like I think that's one of the things where it's like people are going to get a wrong narrative out of it and think they know things, and it's like, no, that's not actually what happened. Right. But we'll go on from here.
Sure.
Khris Davis, I think his acting was excellent. I think he really did embody George and get George right in terms of bringing both kind of that ne'er-do-well look about him and the anger of a young man who doesn't have anything and is just desperately looking for something in his life. I think he did that well. I think he did it really well.
Agreed.
Physically, I think he did a tremendous job.
You could, very briefly, the physical transformation that he goes through this movie. Now, some of it I'm sure is a fat suit. At the same time, like when you're dealing with like really heavy George and he's wearing the clothes and everything, like, okay, that's exaggerated for what the guy is really, but all that time when he's boxing, that's him. Like he got shredded for young George and then changed his diet, and because you can lose, especially your abs, they'll blow up real fast.
Oh yeah.
So he got in good shape, cut down for young George, and then got to eat cheeseburgers for a week and a half, and then came out with, the George Foreman gut that we all kind of know and love from that period of time. And credit to him, like that's not an easy physical transformation.
No, and he nailed, like that's probably the best we've seen in a movie like this since De Niro and Raging Bull doing young LaMotta, old LaMotta. And again, and even beyond that, his actual movements and such in the boxing ring were so good at looking like what George really did. I have to give them a lot of credit for how well they portrayed so much of that. again, the only knock I had on him physically is to me, he looked more like Ernie Shavers at points than George, especially when he's bald. But again, I think his acting was tremendous. I think he did a great job physically. And I think he made you feel what you were supposed to feel as much as he could through the movie. And I think he deserves a ton of credit for that. Forest Whitaker's fine. I don't think he's outstanding in any way. He kind of just does Forest Whitaker things, which are okay. Yeah. I like the depiction of his initial steps in training where he's making him step and learn footwork. I think that's very important to show that, George was this crude powerhouse, but he did have to learn fundamentals in order to be successful. I like a lot of the mirroring. Like, we saw the still shots during the end credits, but they take a lot of those moments, actually incorporate them into the movie, with George having a calf across his shoulders and stuff like that. That's very famous. I enjoyed Sullivan Jones as Muhammad Ali. I think, again, your kid's walking away with such an impact of this guy's a douchebag. Like, he was great. I think, there are people who bitched that he didn't look enough like Ali. I say bullshit to that. I thought he looked very much like Ali, and I thought he got
I don't think it cares. I mean, granted, he shouldn't look like me, but you get as close as you can. But to me, it's about, Robert and I have said this about other movies. If your performance is good, they'll be that person without totally physically looking like them.
I think my only gripe with Jones is Ali, and this is more to do with, because of when we see him. This is why this feels this way to me. I think this feels more like an Ali impression than like Ali. Now, some of that is because the first time we see him, he's talking with all the sports writers ahead of the Rumble in the jungle, and that's even Ali, the real person at that point, kind of felt like a caricature of himself because that's the personality he has. He's big, he's bombastic.
Again, you have to compare Muhammad Ali to like Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair. Well, they're on in public all the time. I think Ric Flair said in like a 30 for 30 or something weird, it's like, I never stop being Ric Flair. When I'm walking to the airport, I'm Ric Flair. That was Muhammad Ali for a while.
And he will hit him with the ghetto whopper.
So I think where his performance really kind of comes to life is that time when they meet at Ali's house.
Yeah.
When he tones down because when he's Ali as the character, even it feels a little over the top. It feels a little bit like a stand-up comic doing Ali, just a little bit to me. When he's Ali the person, it comes to life. When he just kind of like, no, please, George, you can still get a shot at the belt. Do me a favor, just kill Kenny Norton because he's ruining my life.
It might have served that character and that performance a little bit better to you when you first see him. He's behind closed doors and he's just being Muhammad Ali. Yeah, and then he walks out and he's the Nature Boy Ric Flair.
But again, in fairness to, in all fairness to George Tillman, who made the movie, it's George's story, not Ali.
Right.
Right. Like, I think that's the thing we got to look at too.
Right.
But again, I thought he was excellent. I really liked Sonja Sohn as George's second wife.
Kima from The Wire, baby. Woo!
Plays that. Yeah. But she was terrific as a supporting figure, as the anti-Adrian, where I believe in you. You got to keep going because I saw this was going to happen. We're not done yet. We got the money to save everything, but I saw you as heavyweight champion, and we have to do it. And again, the earnestness of which his spiritual journey, and his belief in God as a Reformed Christian.
That's my second criticism, though, of this movie. You're both religious people, Robert, if you don't mind me saying so. You're a Mormon. Pat, I think you're some denomination of Christian.
I am a non-denominational Christian, yes.
Okay. Preachers have a point of view. They're not just reading from the Bible. They're giving wisdom. They are taking parts of the lessons of the Bible. They are mixing it with modern day things that are happening, and they are trying to guide people who are from week to week sort of struggling through life. And that is what you go to church for, to get that weekly reset. This is, I understand it in theory. My point being, I never got a sense of what George was saying to the people. Like, yeah, sure, you see him preaching and you see him, saying some pretty uplifting things, but I never got a sense from the movie, at least, what his point of view was. I didn't see in the movie. I think there was an opportunity there to show what God meant to George and what George's message was to the people. And they don't really do that, at least not that I could see. I just was like, here's George being successful preaching. And we see that for a few things. And then like the stuff with him and his wife, when they're talking about the little bit that they get into like the nature of God and all of that, and how
I
God
just have
speaks
to
to them.
sorry, this is gonna bug me until I correct you.
Yeah.
Kima was not his wife. Kima was his mother.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
No, Pat brought up his second wife.
I heard him say Sonja Sohn, and I was like, yeah, she was great as the mother. Okay, fine.
I corrected myself on that one.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Anyway, the point being, this was an opportunity because this movie I think was going to appeal to religious groups. I think there was an opportunity to, like, what did George stand for from a religious point of view? What was he saying to the people that got people to come to church? We don't really get that from the movie. It's almost like the movie's afraid to touch it because you still want a secular audience to come see this. So it's like, and I think this is my biggest criticism of this movie overall. It's a little too safe.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like we just talked about, where they didn't want to touch on maybe Sonny Liston to vilify George too much, where people aren't going to root for him. I think Tillman was afraid to take chances. I think part of that, like what you're talking about, they don't really show George preaching necessarily on the pulpit as much with a true conveyed message where he's reading from Proverbs or whatever. But they want to still get the secular message in there, which to them is George's unyielding faith in what God has planned for him, alongside his wife and her sustaining his belief, where they were like, she was like, God told me you're going to be heavyweight champion of the world. And so he perseveres despite, achieving enough money to run the youth center and for his family to be financially stable.
Perseverance as a theme, which is a big part of this movie, it's almost the spine of it. That's great. And the movie does a great job of saying, this is an inspirational story. The story is meant to inspire you. The movie, I think, succeeds in being inspiring. My kids walked out of there going, what a great guy to follow and be like. I can't, as a movie critic, though, not say that, okay, you have to do more than just be inspirational. There has to be, this is not a slight movie like the way, what we say was a Renfield or, something else that I use that same phrase of late. Might have been Dungeons and Dragons. Like, these are slight movies. There's not a whole lot to them. It's not like that. There's more meat to this movie than all of that. But it was a little, I used the word safe before. This is a little too sanitized.
There's more than sanitized, to be honest.
What'd you say?
I think safe is more accurate than sanitized, to be honest. I think you hit the nail on the head with safe. It is a movie that's afraid to take chances or go too deep into anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't want to say this in a truly condescending fashion, but this could almost be like a Hallmark movie.
No, you're not wrong. You're dead on.
It's almost there.
I was going to say it's not unlike the biographies that Mark's daughter would have read when she was reading, for school or whatever. It's a very, safe, compressed, condensed version of the story that gives you the important bullet points, but some of those bullet points wouldn't hit as well without the context in between.
And it almost comes across like it's like a big budget made for TV movie. Like, when we were kids, this is the kind of thing that would be on like CBS on a Sunday night.
Yes.
Pat, anything else before I go over to Robert for his craft review, since we're at an hour?
For the problems itself with the narrative, with the stuff they leave out necessarily or don't touch on enough, like we've talked about, I think for the stuff they do, it's well done. Again, I'll particularly point to how accurate the boxing scenes are, which is very hard to come by, but they really do. It's not just guys punching and looking. They have George pushing and making his awkward movements, and the way Joe is knocked down in that fight and other fights, they look very, very good and very lifelike and detailed. I have so much respect for how much they devoted to the craft and quality of that. The performances throughout are very, very strong from the cast for the most part. I'll actually point to Forest Whitaker as probably the least entertaining part of it to me. And that's not a knock on him. It's just that's how he's written.
Yeah.
He's written to be a voice to guide you along, which is not necessarily particularly entertaining. And for me, knowing how it really went on, there's always that bit of when this is not the actual story. Like Brodus was out by the time George turned pro. And, there we go.
Yeah, to be clear, I enjoyed the shit out of this movie. I was entertained. I think it's a well-done movie. It's just not perfect.
Right. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is that I don't think any of us disliked it. I enjoyed it. And I understand. And again, I think we all, because we know the context of the story, understanding it's a very difficult story to tell in those time constraints because there's so many peaks and valleys, the year gap, everything that went on in between is a lot. And I think they do almost as good a job as anybody else could have. I think take the chances, expand the movie's runtime to 2:30 because you're not scaring anybody off at that point.
Right.
And put in the bit with Sonny Liston. Put in the bit where he's actually preaching and talking about the difference that it's the acceptance of God made in his life and why it's pushing him this way.
My kids,
and I think it's a stronger film.
Right. My kids and this, I'm going to bring this up and then I'm going to go over to Robert. I brought this up earlier in the show and I want to address it now. When you have the friend character be the one that's the reason why he has no money, and again, he's a pastiche of different characters. It's taking a very complex thing and simplifying it to one guy who did a bad thing.
Which it needs
we can
to.
move this narrative on. My kids were even like, could we have seen a little more of him though? Like, what's he doing with the money? Why was he doing that? Why is he a drunk? Like, and it goes to like the Sonny Listen thing that we were saying before. It's like, how many stories did you want to tell in this one story? I get what they're saying, and I don't think they're wrong. I think spending a little bit of time with him so that you see what his motivations are, instead of like it just like he just disappears from the movie for a while and then he reappears for that one plot point and then he's gone again. And it's like, I hear their complaints, but I think the master it needed to serve was brevity. And if this was a television show, if this was 10 episodes on HBO, you could get into him a little bit more. You could spend time with him. In a 2.5 hour movie, which baby are you going to kill? And he's perfectly fine to kill off.
Of the ones of all the points we made that we needed to expand on, he's the least that we need to expand on. It said he took the money, he put it into very high risk shit that was not safe, and he lost it all. George blindly trusted him because he was his friend. I think we're fine with that. I don't think we need more context than that in the story we're telling.
All right, Robert, go ahead, back clean up.
I'm just going to echo what you guys said again. The acting's all very good. There's a few editing errors that kind of annoyed me when watching some of the boxing in particular. One that stood out to me, I think this was from the Ali fight, where George is not sweating, and then he sits down in the corner and he is. Like, again, this is editing continuity issues.
Yeah.
And again, like I get that you do the best you can with what you've got, but you get like, especially with that fight, like those guys both needed to be soaked that entire time. Like that's just one of those things that shouldn't have gotten away from you. I agree that, give this thing another like 10 minutes. Let's flesh out a few things. Let's make George's lows lower, and the highs become higher because of that. Like this is one of the things that this movie doesn't quite understand is the necessary contrast. George's redemption, it's not that there's no difference between his character early and late. It's that it's such a somewhat narrow degree that it doesn't feel as emotionally impactful as it should. And again, this is, if you want to tell look, man, redemption stories are hard because you have to be willing to tell the lows. Even if it's not an objective low, it has to feel like a low. And not to get too religious for just a minute, but since this is what this plays into, like those moments when you accept the redemptive power of Christ, like that, every bad thing you've ever done feels worse. Like you leave that behind, and it all feels just. Again, like George didn't do any. Like, I'm not saying he was a great guy when he was young, but there's a lot of stuff he didn't do. That
and even then, from a craft perspective too, Robert. When we move from the Ali fight to the 5-man exhibition, Archie Moore and Dick Sadler aren't there. There's an unnamed Gil Clancy who is there, played by the guy who played Mikey Palmise in The Sopranos season 1.
Yeah. The
reason George fired them is because he was blaming them for his loss to Ali, and at one point going so far as to claim he thinks he was poisoned by them.
Yeah.
You could have thrown that in there in a minute and a half and be like, the hell did you do to me? You're out, whatever, to really show how low George was sinking, that he went to that kind of desperation. Almost as bad as blaming like a 45-pound costume on why you didn't perform well in a fight once.
Who would have thought? Or, you
son of a bitch, you beat me to it.
Or, he clearly had an egg weight sewn into his glove, because that's why my head
or he was cursed by gypsies.
Yeah. The latter of which it might be.
George actually was cursed by gypsies in Africa. He actually was. Ali had a witch doctor put a curse on him.
Okay.
Ali did, actually, for those of you who don't know.
Wonderful.
Dude, the head games Ali played with him were like, if I wanted to expand one other thing, it would have been the Rumble in the Jungle, like the lead up to that. I don't need the 3-week delay for the cut and whatnot.
No, but do the stuff like George bringing German Shepherds there, which were the dogs that the Roman people used to like basically go after Africans, specifically those who were living in Zaire at the time. That's a symbol of oppression to them. George comes with his 2 German Shepherds. The witch doctor stuff. All that craziness.
That moment is meant to be so like. It's such a great moment because, again, like externally, George has everything. He's the champion. He's getting a giant payday to fight this cultural figure that he's favored to beat, but his life is falling apart and everybody hates him.
Yeah.
And you need that juxtaposition to make what follows work even better, because then, no, I'm not fighting. No, I don't have the money, but I'm right. And that's what matters. So that when he chooses to put the good man he became back in the ring with the gloves on, everything's different. And they shoehorn that. They shortchange it to a couple of scenes with Forest Whitaker going, okay, you got to fight. You got to be the angry guy again. And George going, no, I don't. I don't need to be that guy to win. I really don't. And again, it gives short shrift to what should be this big emotional payoffs, because this is a movie that's a little bit afraid of highs and lows in the way that these kinds of stories need. And again, I don't care if it's real or fiction. If your characters are going on these big redemptive arcs, you can't be afraid to show the lowness.
Right.
And that's not just the physical lowness. That's that's the quiet lowness. That's I'm cheating on my wife and it's really wrecking my relationship and my parents are looking at me sideways. And yeah, I've got all this money and all these cars, but it's so hollow and it's so empty. And again, it's given superficial play here, but if you want this to resonate in ways that this story should, you can't be this superficial with it. You have to sit in it. It has to mean something. And for as good as this movie is, and I didn't hate it, I rather enjoyed it, but you can see where this should have been so much better than it was, pretty much all the way through.
All right. With that said, unless we've got anything else, here comes the money.
We're in the money. We're in the money.
All righty. On a budget, this thing bombed, by the way. On a budget of $32 million. This is one of those where like it's a passion for us to talk about, and I'm not unhappy we're doing this, but when I pick movies, it's like, okay, what are people going to see? Not this fucking thing. They're at a budget of $32 million.
Yeah, well, look, and again, we'll get to it, but look what you put it up against.
That didn't help.
3.1 million. Well, it went up against Are You There with God? It's Me, Margaret. What do you call it? Mario Brothers was 3-4 weeks ago.
Well, but still, you know that thing's going to be a juggernaut.
Sure, but again, first of all, when who put this out? Sony. I mean, this is a conversation
that really says all it needs to be said, doesn't it?
I said this to Alexis though, like if everyone waits until the juggernauts are done making money, everyone puts their movies in September. You can't do that. You gotta, you pick a date and you go with it. 3-4 weeks out from the Nintendo movie, you hope you make some money. This one just, I'll get to it in a second.
This was one to release closer to a very big Christian holiday, like an Easter or a Christmas.
This should have been an Easter release.
I totally agree with that.
Especially because there was nothing else coming out around that time.
Right.
So yet again, on a budget of $32 million, it made $3.1 million. The number one movie of the weekend was, in fact, Super Mario, 4 weeks running. Evil Dead Rise kept its spot, retained its spot at number 2.
I'm gonna give some shout outs to the Evil Dead Rise movie. Only a 50% drop for a horror movie in its second week. That's a really good hold. That's a solid hit.
Can I tell you, like, I went back, I cut the TikTok out of it of us talking about the sound design. We heaped praise upon Evil Dead Rise. I mean, like, we criticized it where it needed to be criticized, but as far as but we have this reputation for being particularly negative on most movies that people like, and we gave Evil Dead Rise not even a dainty but a pretty stern hand job. But I've listened to 2 different critics that I take seriously, they're internet critics, but still, the critically acclaimed guys didn't love it. The half and the bad guys didn't love it either. And I'm like, what the hell that this movie hit us the way that it did? but two known, I think, fairly on the ball sets of critics, very different critics, but still sets of critics, didn't see the value in Evil Dead Rise, and I was really floored by that.
I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say anything.
I think you'll like it.
What was the first thing you said, Robert?
Well, even amongst internet critics, there's still kind of a pretension against horror movies.
It's fair.
That a lot of them come into it thinking if this is not a deliberate prestige horror,
mm-hmm.
And let's be clear about Evil Dead Rise. This is not prestige horror.
Right.
They approach it from such a very negative place to begin with that they never really kind of get over that. And
Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret from Lionsgate, formerly a studio. Debuted at number 3. My daughter apparently saw it with my wife. They had a girls' night out and they saw it. And it's funny. I was like, why don't we just go as a family? And she was like, you can't show Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret to our 9-year-old son. I'm like, oh, okay. I read Super Fudge and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. I didn't read that one.
I was going to say, in 4th grade, they had the boys read Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and the girls read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
Oh, are you shitting me? Okay.
I swear you, they did that.
Really... And people will tell you there's no such thing as biological differences between men and women.
Well, just a quick aside on that. My wife loved it. My kid loved it. My 12-year-old daughter. But she was also like, I've never identified with a movie more than Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So, take that for what it's worth. Hey, I took my kids to go see Return of the Jedi, which had its 40th anniversary release, and it debuted at number 4. So here are the movies not doing better this weekend than a 40-year-old Star Wars movie. John Wick, which fell from 4 to 5, which I think got its POV date of May 23rd. D&D, which is currently PVOD. And Air, which is currently streaming on Amazon.
Need to watch that.
Air's good. Punyan Selvin Part 2 debuted at number 8. The Covenant fell from 3 to 9. Poor Guy Ritchie.
Oof.
Yeah.
That's really look, man.
No promotion for that again. Shocked, but whatever.
Again, not only zero promotion, but sadly a very good story.
Mm-hmm.
Two things working against it. One, it's a good story, but it's about something that happened last year, and nobody wants to talk about it. So because for those of you who don't know, there were a lot of stories like this. This is a fictional one, but it's based against the real backdrop of the Taliban taking over Afghanistan again, and soldiers from the U.S. going back to save some their interpreters and whatnot, people who would be viciously mutilated and murdered by the new regime, and people just aren't in a position where they want to talk about that catastrophic failure.
Right.
And also, second thing working against it, Jake Gyllenhaal as your lead is just never a good sign for your movie. I've said it plenty of times. I'll keep saying it.
Sisu. So I've been saying for the last little bit now that movies that I want to talk about, but I'm not going to make a DNU Hollywood proper on, or I'm not going to do it with the weekend that it comes out. We'll get to them later on in the year when they're PVOD. Sisu is one of them. Ronnie pulled a big time on me. He diva'd me. And so a little ways back, because I knew you didn't want to do it, and we thought it'd be funny if we did it together, we decided we were going to do the Barbie movie. What's hilarious about that is not only are we doing the Barbie movie, but I don't do the split reviews anymore for a variety of reasons, but in this particular case, I'm going to make an exception. We're going to put Barbie up against Sisu and not not do the money segment.
I don't know if Ronnie's going to do it, though. I talked to him because he was like, are you doing that date? I was like, no, I'm not available during that time. Mark knows that. Okay. He was like, So I don't know that Ronnie's going to do it, to be honest.
No, he's going to do it. I'm going to make him. If we're going to North Carolina, put a gun to his head. I've committed to this plan. We're doing it.
But I think one thing we haven't hit on during this, more than maybe this particular movie, Big George Foreman, more than anything else, is a very niche audience from jump. And I think that's one thing we need to address.
Well, we can address it now because it fucking didn't even make the top 10. Yeah. It debuted at number 11 in 3,000 theaters. This thing made gross domestically less than $3 million. And like I said, I think worldwide it's at 3.1. Religious movies, I know you wanted to talk about Jesus Revolution at one point, and it's not something that we talk about on here a lot for one reason or another, but religious movies aimed at Christian audiences, they go by the busloads. They usually do well. I don't know why this one can't find its target.
There's a couple things I think, and I'll postulate on them a little bit if you'll allow me.
Yeah, please.
One, it's not overtly marketed as a Christian movie per se.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who know the story of George know that he did become a preacher, know that he is a Bible-believing Christian. But there's really nothing in the marketing that says an overwhelming triumph of the Spirit of God or anything like that involved in it. They're trying to keep the marketing very secular for it.
Yeah.
Two, George is a figure that like we all remember fondly from when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
Kids today have no idea who George Foreman is largely.
They know the grill's named after him, and
Exactly.
I would tell you, and
He's
I would
the
tell
grill
you,
guy, not a fighter,
right? And I would tell you that there's a lot of kids they don't know why it's the George Foreman grill. That name means nothing to them.
Yes,
they don't know that that's a guy. It's like, oh, it's a George Foreman grill. It does George Foreman grilling things.
That's another part of it. You know, that's he's not a figure who's in the public consciousness the way a Muhammad Ali is.
Yeah.
The way even modern boxers like guys like Anthony Joshua or who is not a champion at the moment, I would tell you is significantly more aware of in the public consciousness.
Kids know who Mike Tyson is. Kids know who Mike Tyson is, but you want to know why they know Mike Tyson? The fucking tiger. He's the guy with the tiger. He's
in the Hangover,
yeah. He's the guy in the Hangover movies,
right? And George has largely not done things like that post boxing career. He's basically stayed to making an appearance here or there in a boxing related forum,
right?
But not really in the public spectrum so much. Where it's like, hey, let's wheel out George Foreman for this or whatever. You know, he had his short-lived sitcom that lasted all of 7 episodes, and that's about as much of that as he did. But that's the thing. He's a very relevant, almost spectral figure to a certain extent, even though he's very much alive, thank goodness, in the realm of boxing and sports as a whole, but not necessarily the whole world of sports, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And to the public, especially. Like when I went to see this movie in the theater, there were me, 2 guys who were probably in about their 50s or 60s, gray hair. One was wearing a Juan Marichal baseball jersey, which should kind of tell you the era he's from. And there was like an older couple who looked as though they had lived through both eras of George. So there's 5 of us in a theater on the first day the movie's out. Granted, it's a matinee, but still, I would think the matinee audience would be heavier than the night audience because you want to get your early bird specials in there. And then there's a hardcore boxing fan like myself, where this is a story I want to see played out and do that. So you have to understand with a lot of these figures, because we've moved so away from boxing as a real mainstream sport for the most part, it's not going to have the same impact 20 years later that other ones are going to have. Like if you came out with, I'm trying to think of somebody who was very relevant in another sport in the 90s that, didn't necessarily stay around, but I think more people would go see something like, to use an example, let's say a Charles Barkley. Well, no, not Charles because he's still very much, but like if you made a Grant Hill movie, I think it would do bigger numbers than this because of the spectrum of the NBA versus boxing at this point in time in public consciousness.
I'm sorry, any movie you make about a football player.
Any movie you make regarding a sport is going to largely live or die by how well known that person is outside of said sport to a certain extent.
Funny? I'm
sure the Joe Montana movie will just clean up
that, and not only that, but also how well said sport is perceived in the public forum.
I wanted to address that really quick because, we and I purposely do this because we can be a little in our own bubble and then be surprised, that we are misunderstood, or that we don't understand what's happening around us. I do make a point of trying to, as a group of friends, as a group of podcasters, please don't get too insular. Please get out of this fucking bubble that we created. And I say that because, as much as we're boxing people and we understand boxing, I had my girlfriend over to watch the Tank Davis Ryan Garcia fight, and she's asking me questions like, "Is there a boxing season? Does this ever stop? How often do we were watching the following weekend? We were watching the Cepeda fight on DAZN, and she was like, "When don't they fight?" And I'm like, "It's like there's a fight every fucking Saturday and some Fridays, the occasional Wednesday and Thursday. There's fights all the time. This never stops." And I was explaining the force sanctioning bodies, and I was explaining the various weight classes and everything.
You over-explained.
Well, that's the thing. It's like,
did you mansplain?
I always mansplain. I don't give a fuck. My point is,
Mark is just so masculine. Everything he does is mansplaining.
Just everything, just testosterone, just everywhere. My point is, she's a normal, regular, everyday gal. She has her interests, like every gal you meet.
But I was
gonna say,
I find your description of normal if she's dating you to be a bit suspect.
You and me both, Rob.
Eat a dick,
Hey,
both of you. Listen,
hey, to be abundantly fair, the first time I come on here and say, "Hey, I'm dating someone seriously," I expect you to say the same thing.
my first question is just where did you build her and order her from Japan? And then talk to me about the price you paid, because anyway, it doesn't matter. My point is, most normal people, boxing is a very niche sport.
Yes.
That is the point that I'm trying to make. Most normal, everyday, average people, if they watch a sport at all, it's like football, baseball. That's probably it. Maybe basketball. Once you start getting into like hockey and boxing and MMA, this is all various niches, and people don't get it. They don't know it. And so all the way back to Big George Foreman, you're probably not going to get these people to go see a boxing movie, even if they have a religious bent to them.
And I was going to tell you, the other part of it is the nostalgia of George.
Mm-hmm.
If you weren't there for it, it's largely not something that anybody understands the relevancy of.
Right.
If you made a movie today, like a biopic, and let's just, you mentioned MMA. Let's say if they made a Chuck Liddell biopic, right?
Right.
I think it would do fair to well numbers. Not great,
Sure.
but I think it would do fair because MMA is much more in the public consciousness.
Right.
And Liddell is a much more recent figure that during the bro era of MMA, when it was at its peak, he was largely the face of.
Oh my God. If you did a movie that features Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, you'd pack the house.
Like, I don't know that we'd pack the house, but I think it would do good because there's enough people.
Well, that feud was entertaining enough that I think you would, but I'm also, yeah.
But there's enough people exposed to that, and Chuck Liddell is.
Then you have Tito trying to talk and promote the movie.
No, okay.
But my point is,
you wheel out Chuck, and if you've not seen Chuck hitting pads lately, it's the saddest thing in the world.
Let Pat finish his point, please.
My point is, it's recent enough that there is nostalgia for it and that era, but it's also there's a lot of UFC exposure currently, especially to a sports network.
Right.
You know, ESPN has Top Rank Boxing on almost every weekend. You know, most, we'll say at worst case 3 weekends out of 4 in a month. But it's not as though it's on there other than that, really.
You make a great point because people think the UFC is MMA. They don't know there's all these other little organizations out there. I had to explain what Bellator was.
Right. Even PFL, which is on the same network as the UFC.
Yep.
Right. So what people don't realize the sport is mixed martial arts. They think the sport is UFC.
Yes.
Boxing doesn't even have that kind of name notoriety because when I'm like, oh, what's the big sports league? And I'm like, there's 5 of them. They're like, Top Rank, Golden Boy, Matchroom. And they're like, by the time you get to the end of that explanation, whoever you're talking to, girl, boy, indifferent, they're glazed over. They don't fucking care anymore.
Yeah. Again, like if you want to sell boxing like that, you don't sell like, so they don't. Who's the league? You have to go. There is no league for boxing.
Right.
You have a pool of boxers, and most of the time they fight each other. So
you can't answer the question who's the champion in boxing. Like you and I, we can talk about it.
There's very few divisions for which you can answer that question clearly.
Right. Between the 4 belts and 87, again, she sat through an entire pay-per-view and there was a belt in every fight. And she was like, what the fuck's with all these belts? And I'm like, welcome to boxing. All right, we got to move this on. But yeah, unfortunately, Big George Foreman didn't even crack the top 10.
And I don't think any of us thought it realistically would.
I didn't think it was going to bomb this badly.
My hunch would have
normally I do this. Don't want to. Okay, I feel bad that this movie is doing so.
My hunch for this would have been more like 5 to 10 rather than 3 to 5.
Right.
I think that's fair. I saw like 7 as a best case scenario.
Well, I thought the church was going to carry the movie, and kind of like my prediction that D&D was going to make $1 billion, woefully inaccurate.
Don't know why you predicted that.
So again, let's go back to an earlier point where it plays it very safe.
Right.
It probably thought that by staying away from secular marketing, it would broaden its audience, when in reality, it probably did the opposite and didn't entice the churchgoers to come
That's
see
a
this.
Misunderstanding of the church crowd, because when you speak to them directly, they will loyally follow you. When you're not speaking to them directly, they kind of ignore you.
Look at the series God's Not Dead, when it specifically markets to that audience.
Right.
They're on their 3rd or 4th movie, and they're just still chugging along, turning a profit.
If they do another one, it would be a 4th iteration of a franchise that got 3 theatrical releases of a largely audience that you would never think would do well. But the first one was like a runaway success, even if it's not particularly well made.
Based on just a weird concept too. Like,
right.
Hey, this philosophy professor doesn't like religious people, and then
but the thing is, they hit on a thing where people who love Jesus want to go see a movie about what Jesus's love can help the human do.
The other thing is, you have a large section of Black people who are also devout Christians who would have probably loved to see this movie if they knew it existed. Yeah. But I'm not entirely sure how much of the marketing, because again, when you
I never saw a preview I never saw a trailer for this movie.
Mm-hmm. I only saw trailers for this movie when I was watching boxing on YouTube.
Yeah. And like I said, I think I don't know if when Sony was marketing this movie, if anyone thought about this or if they did this and we just didn't know about it, because I don't watch BET or anything. So maybe it was there, maybe it wasn't, but I'm not getting the sense that anyone in the marketing department was like, go for the Christians, go for the Black Christians, especially. This is their movie. And it also, going back to The Craft, not that I want to go all the way back to an hour ago, but I also don't think this movie really has as far as identifies as a Black movie. This is George Foreman has a secular, has a broad audience appeal. That might almost be the most damaging thing about it, is that because it has such a wide appeal, it appeals to nobody.
We hired the director of Soul Food, and we decided not to make a very
this needed to be a little more creative, a little more Black Panther than it was.
Just also for the record,
mm-hmm.
The director in this case might be one of the weaker links for this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff he does that works very well. There's stuff that is shot very well, but this guy hadn't directed a major motion picture in 4 years, 4 to 5 years.
Just take a second. Soul Food, Men of Honor, Notorious Faster, The Inevitable Defeat of Mr. and Pete, The Longest Ride, The Hate You Give, and now Big George Foreman. And he produced a bunch of the barbershop movies and Roll Bounce.
So, again, this is not a guy who is devoid of talent. I don't know,
but now having gone over that and having said what I said out loud a few seconds ago, I'm like who took his Black card and said he wasn't allowed to use it? Why?
There was a pretty. I'm led to believe there was a pretty unanimous vote about that after The Hate You Give.
Okay, all right, moving on. We got The Pope's Exorcist, fell from 7 to 12. Beau is Afraid. Apparently, it's 3 fucking hours, by the way, and is now in wide release.
Yeah. It's not a short movie.
We're gonna have to talk about it at some point. I don't know when.
Speaking of not short movies, Peter Pan and Wendy clocking in at 2 hours.
Wait till tomorrow. Minutes. Jesus, 8 to 14. Renfield, another movie that now that one I have no problem fucking. You win some, you lose some. Universal.
Not to jump the gun, but boy, am I glad of the Dracula movies I saw before. I was like, man, am I glad I called rights on the Demeter.
Polite Society debuted at 15. Chevalier 11 to 16. Nefarious 14 to 17. Suzume 10 to 18.
Say that again, please, because you hurt me.
Chevalier Laval. Somewhere.
Chevalier okay, just so.
Oh wait, whatever, Kelsey Chevalier. I got it. Shut up.
There you go. It matters.
Go. You and Kelsey can go bowling, okay, and say French shit to each other.
Somewhere in Queens. Hold on for just half a second.
What?
If you're trying to say you want me to kill her, you can just be less subtle than saying, why don't you go, how do you think that's going to end? Mark, you're smart enough to know that.
I wouldn't mind if I don't get ogled like a piece of meat on podcasts anymore, personally, Robert.
Scream fell from 17 to 20 currently on Paramount Plus. Creed 18 to 21. Born to Fly debuted at 22. The Eight Mountains at 28. 32 Sounds at 34, and Nuclear Now at 35. Jesus Christ. RMN at 42. Four Quartets 45. The Monster Without 48. And that was The Weekend That Was. All right. No surprises here. Hey, they fixed their shit, Robert.
They did. We bullied them into it, as the Super Mario Brothers movie has now grossed more than twice Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Yeah. It's for shame, Marvel. For shame.
Crossed the $1 billion mark, and we're all
first
happy.
One this year. I think fastest animated movie to do so.
Only one this year.
Ant-Man and the Wasp died at 474. John Wick
lost the money, not a small amount.
John Wick currently the only thing keeping Lionsgate afloat at number 3. Creed at number 4. Dungeons and Dragons 5.
Dude, okay, hang on. We need to have just a brief lament for Creed 3. Not even hitting 300 million.
Yeah,
that's a pretty dead franchise, you'd think.
Yeah, please don't do any more of these. Dungeons and Dragons 5, Scream 6, Shazam. Speaking of dead franchises, at 7, but then 8. Evil Dead Rise cracking.
There we go.
Good for you, Evil Dead Rise. And Cocaine Bear in the year of our Lord 2023 has made the top 10 finally at $87 million. Good for you, Cocaine Bear. All right.
I feel like Elizabeth Banks went out and just rented out a couple of theaters to try and get it above Chibi.
All right. Well, this weekend is Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm actually after I go have lunch with my buddy, I'm taking my kids to do a Guardians of the Galaxy marathon. So I'll be seeing it tonight. Starting at 6:45. I don't understand why we're doing such a late start on that. It's like 7.5 hours to get through all 3 movies, and there's got to be breaks in between. Like, why? It's gonna be 1 o'clock in the morning. These poor children that I'm forcing to see these movies.
I don't think it was meant for children.
Yeah, like don't. This is meant for the people who are developmentally children, not physically children. Hey, I've done them. I probably will again in the future. I am in the glass house in which I'm throwing stones. I'm just saying. Don't take kids with those.
I think I did a double feature of Captain America when the Winter Soldier came out. I think I did a double feature of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I did the entire trilogy for Lord of the Rings. Like, I've done my fair share of movie marathons.
Trying to remember the last one I did. Because I think I did one for The Dark Knight Rises, so I got to watch all 3 of those in a row, which was kind of fun. Because I never saw Batman Begins in the theater, actually. I think I did The Hobbit. I did when Battle of 5 Armies came out. I did the marathon for all 3 Hobbit movies.
I cheated for Rocky Balboa. We did 1 and 2 the day before the movie, and then the day of the movie, we watched 3, 4, 5, and then went and saw Rocky Balboa at night.
The Lord of the Rings one was fun because I had never done a movie marathon in theater before, and we were all kind of concerned about food. It's like a 9 to 12 hour fucking day here in the theater. We were like, how are we going to eat? And do we have to go buy popcorn every 3 hours? Like, what the fuck? So like my friend Jupak, he snuck in a whole bunch of like Uncrustables, and then we find out later like you're allowed to leave and like go get food.
Yeah, like the local Cinemarks here, if you're doing those marathons, like if you have, because they give you like badges for those, like if you got one of those, we don't care if you come in with outside food and drink.
Right. Yeah, they give you like a wristband or something, like go get like a bucket of chicken and come back. They want people to have a good time. In any case, this is the last you're going to hear of Big George Foreman because Guardians of the Galaxy owns the theaters for the next 2 weeks. Then after that is Fast X. So there's nothing the weekend of the 12th, which is why like we're doing the triple features and TV parties that entire week. Fast X comes out on the 19th, followed by The Little Mermaid, followed by nothing.
Have you seen the character that Jason Momoa plays, for the record?
In Fast X? Oh, sorry. Followed by the Amazing Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, one of Pat's favorite cartoons.
Comic book movies aren't for comic book fans, people.
No, they are not. All right. Yes, I have seen Jason Momoa in the Fast X trailer.
Yeah, he's supposed to be.
I thought we were reading The Little Mermaid. I thought Aquaman was crossing over.
I wish.
Wouldn't shock me.
The Little Mermaid. Look, I hate to be, you, but The Little Mermaid is gonna suck dick. It's gonna be so bad.
Wait, when you say I hate to be you, and you say that, do you mean me or Robert? Because either way,
it's me.
Yes.
Me.
First of all, yes.
In this instance, it's me in particular because dude. I'm gonna make a very bad joke here, so anyone easily offended, you remember there's a disclaimer. I feel like they hired a person of color to play Ariel because that's the only color in this movie. That thing is just black and white and shadow. It looks so bad visually.
I saw the latest trailer where you could see some of the other stuff. It's not as bad as you're making it. I mean,
it's pretty bad.
The underwater stuff.
Underwater.
The underwater stuff looks like shit.
No. Pat's right. Like Zack Snyder underwater stuff.
I'm saying the underwater stuff looks terrible, but the whole movie's not underwater, and that got to see other places.
Mark, that movie's already underwater.
Flounder looks like crap. Sebastian is nightmare fuel. Like here's the thing I'm going to tell you. So many poor decisions.
We had a conversation, and then I'm going right into the critical review. We had a conversation about the track record Disney has, and between Peter Pan and Wendy and Pinocchio and just the last couple of in-theater remakes of these cartoons, their track record is so bad. Like I think what did we say? The last 2 movies that were both good and made money were Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella, which was the year of our Lord 18 fucking years ago. I mean, wow. we haven't had some have made money, and some have been good, but none of them were good and made money after Beauty and the Beast. What the fuck? And so I'm looking at The Little Mermaid, and I'm looking at Peter Pan and Wendy, and I'm looking at Pinocchio, and I'm looking at the last couple of movies, and I'm going,
let's be clear,
these are all terrible.
Peter Pan and Wendy is never making money because they just threw it on Disney Plus. Like, fine.
No, but it's not good either.
No,
is my point.
It's terrible.
Like, again, the people like in charge. So the thing that Chris Bailey says, like, they have to, like, when are they going to press the panic button? They already have. Like, the minute they announce, like, we're making Toy Story 12, and fucking, we're doing everything that ever made a hit. We're doing sequels of. Like, they know they're in trouble, but they still have this. They still have movies they made. And again, they're not going to be Warner Brothers and just be like, fuck Bad Girl, we're not releasing it. They have to release these movies. They have to make some of this money back. But they're still kind of throwing out all the stuff they've already made during the era of everything has to be woke and agenda driven and shitty. Like, we're not quite, if anything, we're just now going to make the movies, without, like, somebody has to be an adult running that shop, because they can't have that many more movies left in the can that are this bad.
Well, look, Lucasfilm is already pressing the panic button. You can see that with the Star Wars Day of Cremation for the body. like Kathleen Kennedy just yanking poor Daisy Ridley out there by the chain around her neck.
Put this metal bikini on. So I took my
Say the line, Daisy. You're excited to play Rey again.
So all right, I'm literally going to hit the button as soon as I say this, but so I took my kids to go see Return of the Jedi, and like they never even saw Empire Strikes Back.
I'm sure it was your daughter's favorite thing, right?
Well, on the way there, like, is Rey in this one? I'm like, no, dumbass. Like, it's fucking 40 years ago.
Well, wait for the next special edition when they see
where they insert her in there.
By
But
physical media, it's the only way they can't screw with it.
she's like, I'm only interested in any of the movies with Rey, and I'm like, spoken like a true feminist.
That you're not doing a bit. Like, that's genuinely your daughter's position.
That was genuinely what she said. Dude, my son fucking roasted her, though. My son was like,
good.
My son, Short, I didn't exactly say this, but this basically is what he said. He was like, you're an asshole.
You know what, Mark? When it comes to kids, you're batting 500, but that's okay, because batting 500 will still get in the Hall of Fame.
Thank you, sir.
You bet 500. You're a god in baseball.
So my point is, so we get to Return of the Jedi, and we get to the Jabba the Hutt scene. And of course, very famously, because we're all horny boys, right? We see Leia in the slave girl outfit, and my daughter just sort of looks at me aghast. And then after the movie, like, so what'd you think? She was like, who the fuck puts her in a metal bikini? Why are they torturing this poor woman?
Jabba the Hutt does it because he's the bad guy. This isn't complicated.
No, she was like tearing into George Lucas in this like whole no bra thing, metal bikinis.
Of the 90 million things you can tear into George Lucas for.
Yeah, insisting that women don't wear bras in space. That was her big fucking complaint.
And with she out trying to burn her training bra at this point in time?
You don't wear no training bra, sir. All right, here we go with the critical. Shut up with the critical. Didn't even have to
say
it. With the critical review.
Are you ready? No! I said, are you ready?
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
I don't remember which fairy it was that said it was dangerous to be a critic right now, but Jesus Christ.
Oh, some self-important jackass who's like, man, being a movie critic is dangerous.
Yeah, like people are not going to get attacked, but I will say you are not well liked, and this is a great example of that. Look at that, 45 rotten, 97% audience score. Nobody cares about what the critics have to say. Nobody. So let's talk about what the critics are saying.
Well, look, if they think they can say whatever they want without any repercussions, then they will, and we have to provide some kind of stopgap against that.
Robert's not wrong.
All right. Edward Porter of Times UK, top critic. The script gives us the dullest kind of life story movie, a simplified, unvarying trudge through a checklist of events.
Look, for as safe as this movie plays it, I don't think it's dull and uninteresting.
Yeah, I think that's a simplified review for what actually happened.
Very.
Yeah. Hope Madden of the Screening Room podcast. Hope Madden of the Screening Room podcast, not even the Screaming Boy podcast, but the Screening Room podcast, gets to be on Rotten Tomatoes. And here we toil in obscurity with our brilliant insights. Anywho.
Because we talk instead of write.
I guess so. George's rise to gold medals, heavyweight belts, and best-selling grills has indeed been extraordinary. It deserves better than the ordinary treatment that comes from Big George Foreman.
That's not entirely unwrong, kind of in line with what we said. Minor note, though, there's a reason they never call it the Foreman Grill in this movie, because the post-credits thing does not mention he sold the rights for that for $137 million, which I would have too, but it does mean they can't ever actually refer to it as the Foreman Grill in this because they don't own the rights.
Yeah. Uncle Robert Winfree, Roger Moore of Movie Nation, says, like the fighter himself, it's big and bloated and ungainly on its feet, but with a gentle charm.
Idiot.
That made his...
so immediately disqualify this idiot.
Alrighty, moving on.
My friend, I appreciate what you're trying to say here but you're reaching for your metaphors, talking about something that you know nothing about very, very clearly.
You lose all credibility within the first 6 words you say.
George was never ungainly. Like, he was never Ali light, but he was never a plot. You've never seen a plotting heavyweight. I have. George wasn't one of them.
All right, a few more of these and then we're done. Chase Hutchinson of Collider. We hate you, Collider. We hate you.
Oh, Mark hates you.
We all hate you. The story of
I
Foreman,
just wish they'd be better.
The story of Foreman returning to compete in the ring after retiring is a remarkable one, but it is told here via painfully unremarkable filmmaking, which crosses over into being downright manipulative with such shamelessness that it almost defies belief.
Okay, hang on just a second here.
I'm with you.
I'm with you for the first half of that sentiment. Like, again, like we talked about, this movie could have been so much better. Claiming that this is manipulative is way outside the bounds of anything that takes place in this film.
Yeah, I don't see the manipulative aspect of it at any point. We actually talked about points where it could have been more manipulative and wasn't. So
yeah.
Kevin Marr of the Times UK, top critic. This one's for Pat. Raging Bull, it is not.
Well, by definition.
Really? Because there's a lot of strong comparisons to be made from the body transformation, from the life. One life starts off good and deteriorates. One life starts off deteriorating and turns out good.
I mean,
and honestly, I'll catch crap for this because people love the boxing scenes in Raging Bull and they're fine. But they also make LaMotta look like a knockout puncher, which was not accurate, whereas these ring scenes were significantly more accurate than almost any others.
I love this one.
There's a real one of the things we talked about, but I'm going to reiterate it. There's a real commitment to making the boxing as accurate as possible in this movie, and bless them for it.
Yeah.
Frank Scheck of Hollywood Reporter, top critic. It sounds like the title of a biography for young readers, and that's pretty much how the by the numbers film plays.
Yeah, that's kind of what we said.
Yeah.
Brian Lloyd of entertainment.ie, an unimaginative and uninspired retelling of a sanctioned history, betraying a deep and complex story that's begging to be told.
Uninspired. If your kids walked out saying, wow, that was inspirational, I'm going to call BS on that one.
Yeah, I'm, again, like, we're all willing to grant that this movie could have taken more chances and probably should have. But to pretend that this is like an uninspired movie, or that it doesn't have a pretty serious, that it's incapable of having a serious effect on people who watch it, is grossly inaccurate.
All right, the future. This is the last one. The future ex Mrs. Pat Mullin, Carla Hay of Culture.
Now your turn. Your turn to deal with the stupidity.
This corny and awkward biopic of boxing champ George Foreman makes his unusual life look dreadfully formulaic. The entire movie is like a limp punching bag filled with nothing but hot air. Get it?
At what point is this formulaic? Like, please tell me, is it, so the 45-year-old who's been off for 10 years always comes back and becomes heavyweight champion of the world against all odds again. Okay. Keep in mind, this isn't a Hollywood story. This is real. This actually happened.
Okay. I remember when we did our 2-year series of heavyweight boxing, how many of them went into, religion afterwards.
Yeah. Who became actual preachers, gave up the life and everything,
right.
and then came back on and still won the
further, like, I remember just how many
the disconnect from actual reality and history in these people is absurd.
These are people making bad reaches about history they know nothing about, and
that's the best summation of that whole sequence, Robert.
I mean, if you don't understand just how rare it is to have a boxer, much less a heavyweight boxer story, and happily, I don't care for your opinion on the history of boxing, because that's a rarity.
And the last thing I'll say, Just the comeback alone, okay? Everybody always talks about these great old guys who make comebacks and everything. Jack Nicklaus winning, the Masters when he was in his 40s is incredible. Nobody was punching Jack Nicklaus in the face while he was doing it, okay? just let that sink in, okay? And I'm done now.
All right, so we have Pat here, who's my co-host, and really he's holding up the whole thing. I just hold the head. But he will be back on the history of boxing again at our noon time slot, May 18th, Thursday. We'll be doing the Barrera Morales trilogy, and then we'll be in June. And I'm gonna make sure I don't make any plans after this because we're gonna need the entire 2 hours for this. Manny Pacquiao, Manuel Marquez, all 4 fights we're gonna look at.
Oh
yeah, that one knockout that sounds like a gunshot. Pat will probably
looks like a gunshot too.
Pat's gonna probably be on our SummerSlam review, and hopefully we'll get him to do Sisu and all that. So we'll see what happens. But Pat's never too far from the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. I got to tell you, Pat, I know you're not into the TikTok with the children, but I don't know if you saw, but
Pat objects to Chinese spyware apps. Who'd have thought?
But the Whitaker fight that I cut 10 minutes out of and threw up on TikTok, wildly popular, and you got a lot of positive praise for being a brilliant boxing analyst and historian.
Well, what can you say? The Chinese know they're fighting.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure the guy doing it was Chinese, or the people commenting were Chinese, but I just want to let you know you're quite popular on my TikTok with the boxing.
Well, it's a hell of a forgery.
Anywho, this past 2 nights,
I'm sure the super padded record Chinese guy who just stopped Joe Joyce was all over that TikTok.
Alexis and 3 nerds reviewed The Mandalorian on Monday night. Myself and David Wright reviewed Picard season 3. Tomorrow,
how that show actually turned into a good season after the first 2 is beyond all comprehension, but it did.
They fucking gave up is what happened. It's just like, give the fans everything they want. Tomorrow, I got to talk about this really
Make
fast.
Your customers happy. Who'd have thought?
Tomorrow, myself, Robert, and Alexis Hana are going to review at noon Peter Pan and Wendy, but we're not going to do a money segment. Instead, Robert's gonna pull out of mothballs his "Everyone Loves a Bad Guy," and we're gonna like a show within a show. I'm gonna play the theme, and Robert's gonna host, and Robert's gonna talk about how Peter Pan is the villain of his own movie.
Okay, you are wildly misrepresenting my position.
That is exactly what you said.
No,
Peter Pan is the villain of his own story.
I did not say that. I said he's not the hero.
Whatever.
Difference between those 2 points.
No, world of difference between Jason's fucking thing about how Peter Pan's a child trafficker.
Superman's not the hero of Superman Returns, but he's not the villain either. That's Robert's contention, I'm pretty sure.
Fine, whatever.
Pretty much.
I don't care. I just want to hear Robert's theme music again. And Robert
you can find it wherever you want. Like, what do you?
No, it has to start a show. It has to be a part of a show.
It existed before that show. It continues to exist after.
I don't care. Anyway,
I also, for the record, let me very briefly. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna feel bad making that point about this movie because apparently this movie just someone else is holding the head and Peter Pan gets dog effed in this story.
Friday, we have the Movies That Don't Suck guys are going to do an interview with the team behind Laced from Panic Fest. Saturday, speaking of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, Robert wraps up his run on comic book villains with a look at independent comics with Jesse Starcher. And I am back in 2014 from the Jonas Exodus. And of course, what brought me back and out of semi-retirement? But Goat Whore. Yes, Goat Whore on the Metal Hammer of Doom back in the year of our Lord 2014.
That got Mark to cut his paternity leave short.
That's right.
Checks out.
Constricting Rage of the Merciless. Next week, we've got a page for DC Meets Hanna-Barbera Volume 3, of which Robert Winfree was the judge on that show. And at night, we'll have
Mark,
a Monday.
I have to ask this about Goat Whore.
Yes.
Does the font for the writing of the band name look like Abdullah the Butcher's forehead?
No, that Goat Whore is intelligible. We'll have a special Monday edition of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 because Tuesday I will be at Caliente doing trivia with my wife. Wednesday, we've got the Movies That Don't Suck and Some That Do with the guys from, once again, at Panic Fest. This time they're interviewing Alex Bex from Our Time and reviewing his movie. And then on Thursday, they'll be reviewing Ghosted and Evil Dead Rise. And at night,
one of those doesn't suck. The other stars Anna de Armas.
And then at night is the Metal Hammer of Doom Jukebox. We're going to focus on Galactic Empire Special Edition and talk some Star Wars. So that's what's going on with me. Robert, do your plugs. Show us where you pissed from.
Well, since AEW's Dark Elevation seems to be canceled at the moment,
really? Yeah, thank God for small favors.
I didn't hate it. Some weeks I did, but in general I didn't hate
I
it.
just want AEW to burn.
Well, since they're having the long and the short of that is since they're rumored to be adding another like 2-hour television show, because we're not stretching ourselves thin over there, are we? You can't do like Dynamite, Rampage, Collision, Elevation, and Dark. That's just a bit too much in terms of the logistics of it all. So something kind of had to give, and it seems like Elevation is what they chose to cut. That frees up my Monday evenings, so there's that. But if it comes back, or there's a decent chance I'll wind up finding something else to do. But my regular stuff at the moment is just down because MLW moved off of Thursdays. Jeremy now does that, so I only cover SmackDown at the moment on the pro wrestling side of things, which got a lot worse the last week.
Hey, you can always cover the GCW shows.
Give me a week and I might. Look, man, they took.
I got a date in a few minutes. Let's move this on.
Well, look, just let me express my pain for half a second.
Okay.
They took Gunther away from me because Gunther's awesome. And they gave me Austin Theory instead. And I still have to deal with Poochie. Like, I'm...
Wait, you got a lighter and I got a... Never mind.
Mark gets that reference.
Yep. No, I got it.
So I will be covering SmackDown, and I cover the UFC events when they happen on this coming Saturday's UFC 288. Henry Cejudo trying to buck a significant trend. He's returning from like a 4-year retirement to try and take the bantamweight title back. He's also trying to buck not just a trend of retirements coming back for titles. Somebody brought this stat up, and I think you'll all appreciate it. The record on the men's side of things for title fights between flyweight and welterweight, so 125 to 170. If you're over the age of 35, the record is 2-28 across the entire history of the UFC. Both of those two are Tyron Woodley. His wins over Damian Maia, who was 40, and Darren Till, who should not have been in a title fight. I can't see that. It's blotted out.
No.
Can't do it, Mark. Give it up. So Henry Cejudo at the age of 36, trying to buck a significant trend against Aljamain Sterling. Co-main event of Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad, which is a fine fight. I expect Gilbert Burns to win. So if you want a full preview
None
of that...
None of this shit matters. Canelo is fighting Saturday.
I'm aware.
Scorecard's already in.
Yep.
I submitted mine. So if you want a full preview of that event, I will be covering... you can listen to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast, where I talk all the world of combat sports, mostly mixed martial arts. I talked about Bare Knuckle this last week because they won the weekend. You can shake your head, Pat, and I appreciate I appreciate that this is not for you. It's not for me about half the time. But
yeah, I was going to say, I remember when you used to fucking dog me for it, and since when did you become a fan?
Since Power Slap reminded me how low the combat sports, and I used that since the carnival sideshow can go. I looked at Bare Knuckle also when you liked it was a bit more degenerate than it is now. It actually is. It's legitimized itself in a lot of ways. But I'm also not going to pretend that wasn't the most interesting thing that happened in combat sports when the UFC main event was Song Yadong beating Ricky Simone over 5 rounds and stopping him in the 5th. And I like Song, but your number 8 and number 10 bantamweights are less interesting as a general rule than Conor McGregor showing up for a fee, getting drunk, and getting into a stare down with Mike Perry, all of which happened.
You almost done? I'm getting alerts saying I got to go.
Yeah. So, again, the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast, if you're interested in the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts, and I cover those in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania. Tomorrow, Peter Pan and Wendy, I am going to try very hard not to piss all over it because I got to avoid Jude Law. That's the only thing I got to avoid. I got to avoid pissing on Jude Law because, bless him, he is so much better than everything else in that movie.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us here. Pat, love you. Thanks for hanging out with us in this afternoon, talking Big George Foreman. Till tomorrow and beyond, be well, be safe, and behave.